break yourself from the identity. See, in a sick society, the point is, we can see nowadays that literally all the aspects that previous generations in this sick society had, they are literally simply deformed and distorted, and not only that, but also demolished before our very eyes. Sexual identity, identity as an individual, and all of these aspects that people would cling to in their lives are simply demolished slowly and surely by a bunch of sick people who believe they own everything and who want all the people to work and function and be exactly the same as everyone else. When you have such a thing, basically you have more or less a hive mind. In a hive mind, all the individuals work the same thing, they have the same roles. Well, they have a predefined set of roles, but within each role, the duties are always the same. Just like a worker ant or a worker bee does certain jobs, while a defender bee or a defender ant does its own job. But all perform the same basic action in the name of the so-called collective. Now, aligning yourself perfectly to a profoundly sick society, well, that's basically no measure of health. Now, in a sick society, in order to be one and the same with the others, well, this is nothing else than sickness, because when you are like someone and everyone is basically like that someone, it means the whole collective shares the same weaknesses as well. Where there is no diversity and all the individuals have the same properties or behavior as someone that they follow blindly, well, the blind spots and the weaknesses of that individual will be the blind spots and weaknesses of the entire collective. Now, identity, if we are to take it in a more modern approach, how I call it is the ID entity, right? Because you're not a human being, you're nothing else than a barcode. In this society where technology is bound to replace you sooner or later, you're nothing else than a bar of codes. Your ID card is nothing else than a bar of codes. You don't see the bar of codes, but you have a certain number, and that number is technically your ID. It's called your ID entity, right? Your identity. It is your ID entity. It is the entity that you are with a certain ID, because it doesn't matter what you are. Now you can see, now we can remember, let's say like that, in the previous generations, the family had a predefined states. There was the mother, there was the father, and obviously the children. Now there is the third gender, which has been acknowledged, I think in Peru at least, and well, other countries most likely will adopt it. There is the third gender, which is called the, well, transhuman, right? The transgender. The transgender has been proven as genetically modified people. If we look in history, there is no claim about these types of people. Now, the point is, even if they may have happened, there is still no claim in history about such things. But I would not be surprised if in 10 years such fake things would be created. Because obviously the ruling families of Europe, and well, who now believe they rule the whole world, they have forged the history that we know, most likely. Well, especially the far history. The history of the more present days, most likely isn't that changed. But ultimately, we don't know what truly happened, for example, in World War II, which was, well, 70, 80 years ago. So why would we expect to know things that happened 1,000 years ago in this sick society? There have been scientific proof provided to communities that history as we know it is all wrong, and the planet doesn't have millions of years based on geological evidence. But again, each one is bound to follow whatever they want. But the identity is nothing else than an accumulation. Back in the times, there was a gender-based identity. If you are a woman, you had certain peculiarities. If you are a man, you had certain peculiarities and certain behaviors that were, well, more or less wanted or expected of by society. Nowadays, we see people who dress like the other gender. We see people who simply don't know what their gender is, right? And we also have this new buffoonery, which is called the transgender, right? Or the that which has transcended the idea of gender, because technically, in the eyes of some sick people, it is the best of both worlds. Now, when it comes to travestites, the point is it will always anger one of the genders, because, real people of a certain gender, they don't want the other gender to dress like them, because where else could your identity be? Now, even if an identity is nothing else than an accumulation, or technically all the ideas and things that you accumulate from other people, all the behaviors that you take as normal from other people, if the identity is nothing else than this, well, obviously, one still needs an identity, right? But the problem is people get attached to this identity. Your identity is a set of principles, a set of goals, a set of feelings, emotions, ideals, whatever you want, behaviors that you choose to function by in different moments of time and depending on whom you interact with. We all need an ego, because for every situation there is a certain ego. When you speak to people, for example, with each person that you have in life, usually you will adapt in a certain way. This is part of so-called cooperation, right? This is part of communication. But at the same time, one does not need to create, multiple personality out of those egos, because, well, one does not need to become focused on those egos. One does not need to become attached to those. Never forget that they are nothing else but accumulations. When you are born into this world, you didn't have any attachments, you didn't have any knowledge of any language, you didn't have any, emotional, psychological, mental attachments towards anything, right? You are just a pure energy of life. And since we have a mind, the mind is, well, a slave of meaning, because the mind without meaning is always lost. Where there is no meaning, the mind is confused. But the true power of a human is to transcend meaning and, well, discover that which they need, that which they kind of require. So, all this being said, you are appreciated. Take care and, well, enjoy life. All I can say, Ferenjan Board signing out.